In this lesson, we're going to take a look at how we can introduce some glow effects into our final rendered images. Alright, so this is the scene that we're going to be working with, so a little bit different than what we've been using up to this point, but for the most part, you can see again just a very simple scene. Now what we're going to do is take this lamp, kind of this lantern type object, and we want to actually give it a little bit of a glow so that it kind of has the appearance of emitting light. So you take a render at what we have right now. All in all, not too bad. Got a little bit of illumination around this. We actually have a light source that's inside this piece of geometry. There we go. It's actually a omnidirectional light. It's got a little bit of a fall off connected to it. Okay. Now, one thing that we can do is actually give this maybe a little bit of shadow just to add a little bit more depth to this. So let's go ahead and give this shadow map shadow here. Now, let's go ahead and re-render this. Now, looking at this, one thing that you might notice is that once you start to enable shadows, you may start to get some of this unusual streaking, kind of these unusual shapes here. Now, the reason is because by default, the 3ds Max scanline render will actually only render or cast shadows through objects in one direction. So if there is a light casting source that's on the inside of the object where its normals are pointing outward, it'll go ahead and just ignore that. So we can fix that in one of two ways. We can either take a look at the render setup and turn on this force two-sided, in which case now when I render, it should force the objects to then cast shadows. Now that's not good for us because it keeps the shadows from coming through any object. Right, so turning on that force two shadows is one way. The other is if we go to this omnidirectional light and take a look down in the shadow map parameters, we can also turn on the two-sided option here. Alright, so at the moment our scene is completely black, which we don't want. So this is a perfect example of where we can use our object parameters. So let's get in a little bit closer here. And I'm going to press F4 on my keyboard so I can actually see the wireframe on this object. And what I want to do is select all these different lamp pieces, these little light illuminating pieces, and with all those selected, go to Object Properties, and we'll tell all of those not to cast any shadows. And now let's re-render. Now we should start to see a little bit of light coming through these areas, but the other metal parts are blocking the shadows. Alright, and that's exactly what we are looking for. Now, to actually add the final touches onto this, we want to get a little bit of a glow type of effect on these little panels. Alright, and the way that we do that is a little bit it's a little bit different. So what we actually have to do is first select this object, or we don't necessarily even need to select the object. We can just go to the material editor, just press the M key on your keyboard. Now at the moment we have a glow material set up, or a special material set up for this piece of geometry. Alright, now that's going to be very important here in just a moment once we actually enable the effect that we want. So let's go to Rendering, take a look at Environment. Okay, and what we want is actually going to be found over here in the Effects tab. So let's add an effect. The effect that we're going to add is a lens effect. Now once we do that, now we have the option to add any of these pre-built lens effects. The one that we're going to add is the glow. So select the glow, we'll add this over into our active effects. And you can see down below we have some parameters that control things like the glow size, the intensity, color, and so on and so forth. Now, what's going to happen is the first time we hit render, really nothing is going to happen. It's going to look just like it did before. Alright, the way that this actually works is we need to define some kind of a special material that we want to glow. So in our case, that's actually done through what's called the Material ID channel. Any of these objects that are over here in the Material Editor, once you select that, you should be able to see its Material ID channel, and by default, all these materials will be set to 0. So let's select this lamp glow material, and let's assign it some kind of a unique material ID channel. Any number will work. Let's say maybe 2. And now, back in this environment and effects, go back to the effects tab, go to the options tab that's found underneath this glow element rollout, and we want to maybe not necessarily apply this to lights, but we will apply it to an image. And for the image source, we're going to determine the object glowing by the material ID. And you can see we can also determine whether it's going to be glowing according to the object ID, the surface normals, or even just the whole image. So we want the material ID to determine which objects are going to glow, and we want it to glow on material ID 2, right, which is what we just set this lamp glow material to. So now let's see what this gives us whenever we render. So it'll go through, render, and then once the render is complete, now we have this glowing effect. Alright, so let's come in and start to maybe just tweak this a little bit. We can start to dial back things like the intensity if we find this is a little bit too bright. So let's maybe see if we can drop this down a little bit. There we go. That's a little bit softer. Now we can even start to bring in maybe the size a little bit more so it doesn't fan out quite so much. There we go, and that's now a little bit more self-contained. And maybe even bring this down a little bit more. Alright, very nice. So you can see just really very quickly and easily we can start to add these effects, and really these glowing effects add almost no render time whatsoever. You can see they're very, very quick to calculate. Right, so we can actually give this some special color if we want to. That's defined by this radial color. So the inner part, if we wanted to give this something special, maybe something a little bit more on the warm side. Give it a little bit of a yellowish tint. Re-render. And now you can see we have a little bit more of that color that's introduced now into this actual glow. Right? Or if we had some kind of a special color applied, we could just use this use source color. Once that's cranked all the way up, it should now rely entirely on the color of the surface itself, the surface of the material. Now once this is enabled or increased to 100%, now anything that we do for the radial color or these mixed colors will have no effect. Or we can actually just find some kind of a mixture in between. So if we find maybe a 50% mix, so that way it uses 50% of the source color of the material and then 50% of whatever we define here. So we can really have a very, very high level of control over what we're going to get as our final result. Right? So that's a look at how we can start to use some of these glow effects to give some of our objects the appearance of more of a light emission source.